So Beatrice, thanks so much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast and to talk a bit further about these topics of coaching and highly sensitive people.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear a little bit more about you really to start with. What's your personal story or experience of being an HSP? So how did you discover and come to understand it, and what helped you in your own growth?
Okay, I feel like there are a few questions in there.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I feel that I've always known I have a specific sensitivity, but I didn't really know the label of highly sensitive person until a few years ago. And even then, I just knew I was a highly sensitive person, but I wasn't looking into it in more depth.
Mhm.
And it was probably a couple of years ago so by that time I'd already started coaching. I became a coach. And at the time I was working with people to make peace with their inner critic. So the inner critic was my specialism.
Mm.
And in that work, I was meeting a lot of the people who were my ideal clients, because I always had a very deep understanding of the kind of people I wanted to work with. And through having this niche or specialism, I started meeting those people who were like my soul clients. But not everyone was like that.
Mm.
So then I think one day I stumbled on a Facebook group. I think it was the Highly Sensitive Refuge. And when I landed in there, I just knew that that was the missing piece. And being part of that group of HSPs, I finally found that group. I felt I truly belonged in a way, which is a very big part of the highly sensitive journey, I feel. So that's how I discovered it, and how I ended up fully embracing it and learning about myself as a highly sensitive person.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. So it was this sounds like the Facebook group was a one piece of a bigger puzzle that you kind of work through for a number of years. Um,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. It was like, yeah, it was like you have that understanding, like it was deep inside me. I knew who those people were, but I didn't have the perfect label or word to use to describe them. So then when I encountered this group, there was this deep inner knowing that it was the right space. And I knew that because I've been working with myself in my own self-development for many years before that, I knew that that was the type of people that I was meant to work with. So yeah, it was quite almost like finding home in a way,
mm.
which felt really good.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. So you mentioned that obviously you're a coach now and working with highly sensitive people. I wondered what inspired you to become a coach and specifically to work with highly sensitive people.
Mm, that's such a good question. Um, I feel that, first of all, understanding myself as a human, even though at the time I didn't know I was also understanding myself as a highly sensitive person,
Mm.
understanding the label of being a highly sensitive person enabled me to understand myself from that specific filter.
Mm.
And also, being part of those groups and communities of highly sensitive people has enabled me to see that people are struggling or having challenges similar to the challenges I've had in the past.
Mm.
So, it wasn't even a question for me, like, should I be working with HSPs or should I be doing something else? It was just an inner knowing. So I just knew that I needed to work with people who are going through the same journey that I have, and that I am still going through.
Mm.
Yeah, so it wasn't, in a way, it was an inspiration because it was, oh my God, this is it. You know, there was that moment of this is it. But then it was just completely natural and organic that I was going to work with highly sensitive people. It was never like, you know, a choice or a decision. And, you know, there was a period of time, probably like 9 months or so, when I was working with highly sensitive people, but I wasn't using the label of highly sensitive because you probably know as well, it's still quite a new word or like label.
Yeah.
And many people resist being identified with being highly sensitive because it's considered like almost like a negative thing.
Mm.
And because of that, I had some resistance initially to using the actual word, and I was more describing the experience of being a highly sensitive person. And in the meantime, I just embraced it, and I thought, well, there are people who don't know about it, there are people who know about it, there are people who embrace it and don't embrace it. And in the end, I just realized I just settled on the fact that I'm going to work with those people who are identified as a high sensitive person and want to work on that and want to understand themselves and want to be coached by someone who understands them from that perspective,
Mm.
and can support them with their experience.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. It was kind of yeah, it sounds like a really aligned kind of process for you. Um,
Mm.
and you mentioned working with HSPs and some of the like working through some of the challenges that they had. I wondered what have you noticed or observed or seen as patterns in challenges that might come up for HSPs?
Mm. Yeah, and I feel it's important to blame right here because there are experiences that we share as HSPs,
Mm.
but at the same time, I think it's important. You know, I was talking the other day about labels, and a lot of people are, I don't want to use any labels. Like labels are so restrictive, so I think it's important to add this disclaimer to say that yes, a label can help you to understand yourself from that framework or that filter.
Yeah.
And it's also important to layer that with the individual experience of that thing. So yes, you are a highly sensitive person. There are things that we have in common. There are patterns and, shared experiences. And then you are also a unique individual. And without bringing these two together, you get a very restrictive view or understanding of the individual. So I thought that was important to mention. But yeah, then in terms of patterns, the thing that comes to mind is that what I notice often, especially for HSPs who have just learned that they are highly sensitive, because they get an understanding of their needs. Like we always know what our needs are because we are aware of our sensory stimulation, we are aware of our emotional depth, we are aware of how much deeper we process our environment, emotions, social. We know that there is an understanding already that we function in a different way and we need longer to process things and we need to clear our energy to be able to function in an effective way in a world that's majorly not HSP.
Yeah.
But I feel that a lot of people, when they first learn about being an HSP, the first instinct is to share this with everyone and to, it's almost like, oh, I'm an HSP, I have these needs, and now you have to, to start to accommodate my needs.
Mm.
And of course, there is some truth in that because I feel it's really important for all the world to be educated in what it means to be a highly sensitive person or any kind of, to be educated on these things. But at the same time, I feel that many HSPs might focus too much on educating other people, sometimes to the detriment of educating themselves, because I feel that learning about being an HSP is very much about an internal journey to understand yourself and what that means. And in the process of understanding yourself, you start to understand how important boundaries are. And this is another one of the key patterns for HSPs. And as long as we don't learn about our own boundaries, and as long as we don't learn to set our boundaries, those things will keep on showing up, like people not respecting our boundaries, people not respecting us as HSPs. And this is why I say, when you learn about being an HSP, start taking it in and learning about what that means for you, because the more you learn about yourself, the more you learn to set boundaries for yourself, the more that will be reflected in the outside world as well. And you will be able to set those boundaries, and people will not cross those boundaries anymore. Because I feel, and I don't know if that's been your experience as well, but boundaries are a really big theme in the HSP trait, I feel.
Yeah, boundaries is a huge one, I guess. Being so sensitive to other people's emotions and the world around you is about, for me, it's about setting healthy boundaries and limits around, what's mine, what's other people's, where do I put my energy, what are my, emotional boundaries, personal space, how do I process what's going on. So yeah, it definitely resonates what you're saying. And also this idea of it being a journey of self-discovery, that, although we can use this label of HSP and it can be useful, it's also, everyone has their own individual experience of this process of discovery and understanding yourself. So, honoring that individuality seems so important as well to me.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned, as you were talking about boundaries, you were also referring to our energy and our emotions. And I think that's just so important, because boundaries aren't just about, right, now I have 2 hours of quiet time and I just use that time however I want. Please don't interrupt me. For example, that's an example of a boundary.
Yeah.
But sometimes I speak to HSPs and they say, well, okay, well, I have really good boundaries, but I still struggle with this thing, which is I absorb other people's emotions, and I just feel like I take on other people's stress, and that weighs so heavily on me. It's just so difficult. How do I get rid of that? And whenever we get to this conversation, and it's very often, this conversation is also about boundaries. And this is essentially boundaries, 2.0 is the next level of boundaries. The physical boundaries, if you will, if you wish, is like the first level. And then the second level is the emotional boundaries, because it's very difficult to start setting, because emotions are intangible, right?
Yeah.
I want 2 hours of time alone. Don't disturb me. I'm gonna sit in my bedroom with the TV off and draw the curtains. That's a physical boundary, and that's very measurable and finite, right? Whereas emotions are intangible, and it's more like, well, what do I do with this stuff that's inside me? Because I just feel it. I don't want to feel it, right? How do I set those boundaries? So for me, that's the next level, or the next layer of boundaries. And and it's a process of starting to set those emotional boundaries. It's not like we're going to sit in a session, right? You're absorbing emotions. By the end of this session, you're not going to absorb emotions. It's not like that. It's a process. This is why coaching is a process, and so is therapy and other approaches.
Yeah.
But the first step, I feel, in setting, because I'm sure some of your listeners will be interested, well, what is the process of setting boundaries when it comes to emotions? The first step is awareness, because very often we just go about our days And many of us are perfectionists and, very driven, very ambitious. We're
mm,
highly successful as highly sensitives in whatever we choose to do.
mm,
So when we do that, it's very difficult to stop and create awareness about what's going on inside us. And we get to the end of the day and we're just exhausted and depleted. And, oh, what do I do now? I feel so overwhelmed,
mm,
and it's a lot more difficult to manage overwhelm when you're overwhelmed. It's much easier to create awareness before that. So, for anyone listening who resonates with the idea of boundaries, emotional boundaries, creating awareness, and
mm,
that can be as simple as checking in with your body
mhm,
every so often during the day. In the beginning you will forget, but even doing it once a day, maybe in the middle of the day or something like that, can be really useful.
mm,
And see in yourself, what emotions are rising inside yourself.
mhm,
And then ask yourself, is this emotion mine?
mm,
Do I identify with it? Um, and there's a really I heard a really interesting metaphor recently, and I feel that's really relevant to us highly sensitive people and also empaths,
mm,
which is be a sieve, not a sponge.
mm. Love that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel as long as you have a mental understanding of what it means to be a sieve rather than a sponge for emotions, over time you can start to adjust and recalibrate yourself so that you allow those emotions to go through you, but they don't get stuck inside you.
Mm. Yeah. What a great analogy. Yeah. Be a sieve, not a sponge. And I love the way you described this process of checking in with your body and yourself and your emotions. I think I think that's so important because um, especially the world we live in and some of the work we do, it can be very mentally stimulating and a lot of thinking and thought and kind of energy up in this kind of headspace. And your reminder to like check in with your body and what's going on there and with your emotions, I think can be so important and useful for people to, you know, check in. Am I okay? Am I where I'm supposed to be with my
Mm.
with my progress? Uh,
Oh, I love that you said that, Josh, because I very often because I work with coaches as well in coaching supervision,
yeah,
and we talk about, when we come to coach, sorry, my thoughts are like, let me rewind.
yeah,
When we go to coaching, um, we are very often in that mental space, like you said, and I feel that's such an important point to make on the, talking about patterns.
mm,
As humanity, we're very mental, cognitive, intellectual, and we try to rationalize everything,
mm,
and almost like disconnect ourselves from anything that happens below the head, right?
yeah,
Um, and very often in my supervision sessions, I talk to HSP coaches that I work with, and we talk about how we support our clients to connect with that deeper wisdom in themselves, in their bodies, in their emotions, to understand themselves beyond the mental, which is very finite, isn't it? Um, and just the other day, I was doing a coaching session, and we were about halfway through the coaching session, and I was just feeling stuck. My client was feeling stuck. I was feeling stuck.
yeah,
I had no idea what questions to ask. I was just like, what is going on?
mm,
And then the client says, I don't know, maybe I'm just rationalizing this, but blah, 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 whatever they said in the session. And
yeah,
in that moment, it clicked for me because it's so easy, even for us as coaches who are trained to do that work, to get stuck in the story on that mental level,
mm,
and you cannot access a deeper wisdom from that same space where the problem was created, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, so the moment we started to access, well, what's happening with your emotions, and where, where do you experience that in your body? How does that show up for you?
Mm,
It was just like super insightful all of a sudden. Like the client started to have some realizations about what was really going on with this problem that they experienced for, for quite some time.
mm,
So I love that you made that point about the mind and connecting with that deeper wisdom.
amazing. Sounds like a powerful session. So you managed to get the insight you wanted from kind of rechecking into the body. Yeah, very cool.
Hmm.
And you mentioned doing work with HSP coaches. Um, and I was curious because I saw on Facebook that you've launched or are launching a program just for HSP coaches, and I wondered if we could talk a little bit about that, what that offers, and
Mhm.
what that work's all about.
Yeah, I have launched it. We started this week actually, so
Okay,
I'm really excited about that.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, so I qualified as a supervisor as well,
mhm,
and it just, for me there was no question about who I was going to work with, because I knew already that HSPs are my people,
yeah,
so I knew that I wanted to work with coaches. And when I started actually doing supervision, um, it was just confirmed for me, and I feel that it's really interesting. I get the sense, and I did a poll in our coaching community not long ago about, I was curious what proportion of coaches identify as HSPs, because, another pattern that we HSPs, I feel, share is that we need to have meaning, and we need to do work that is purposeful and impactful.
mm,
If we don't feel meaning, we are just depleted, and we have no sense of purpose and no sense of energy in our lives. So I feel that doing meaningful work is really important for us, and this is the reason why I feel we are drawn to professions where we can help,
mhm,
you know from being a nurse to teachers, um, artists who make a meaningful impact through their art, and also coaching.
mm,
So I noticed, and this is anecdotal, I'd love to see some research actually on, statistical research.
yeah,
But it sounds like there is an overrepresentation of highly sensitive people in the coaching world.
mhm,
So much higher than the 15-20% in the general population.
mhm,
And while in coaching, we learn a lot of really transformational tools, we are not taught to use the skills that we naturally have as highly sensitive people.
mm,
Our deep empathy is very often seen almost as a negative, because we can absorb emotions and get stuck with them. And I leave a coaching session and I'm super, I feel like I've taken my client's problems on, and I feel like, how do I help this client? Like I really, really want to help them.
yeah, yeah,
So there isn't any training, even though we represent such a high proportion of the coaching community.
mhm,
There isn't any training or anything that teaches us to use what comes naturally to us.
mhm,
So when it does happen, it's almost like a fluke.
mm,
So I thought, well, there must be, there must be a way to support these HSP coaches to really honor their innate gifts, ultimately.
yeah,
Um, and actually, there isn't any program, and there isn't, as far as I know, any or much literature on um, highly sensitive coaches and supporting them to honor their gifts. So that's the reason why I wanted to start this program, to be able to support precisely with that.
mm, brilliant, yeah. What excites me about that as well is a kind of, in my mind, it's like a ripple effect, that if you can empower the coaches to use their gifts and feel comfortable with that, then you're also impacting all the clients that they'll see in their, in their career and in their coaching. So to me, it's like an amazing way to amplify the impact as well. Um,
Mm, I love that you said that, because it's creating that ripple effect, and um, especially now, because as humanity we are going through a paradigm shift.
Mm,
Like 5 years from now, we will look back to how the world was 7 years ago, like before COVID started, and we will realize how many things have changed.
mm,
And I'm noticing that more and more people are stopping and reflecting and questioning their previous decisions. They're questioning their jobs. They're questioning is this all there is to my life, or is there more that I can achieve? And this is what I mean by paradigm shift, where we're going through a period of transition as humanity, where we're challenging the status quo.
mm.
Who says you have to work in an office 5 days a week? Well, the last year has demonstrated that actually you don't have to,
Yeah,
for many jobs.
yeah.
So a lot of people are starting to challenge those things that we've always done in that same way. So because we're going through this period of transition, I feel this is an amazing opportunity for the coaching profession to be elevated and to contribute to this paradigm shift, to support people to make conscious and intentional decisions about how they want to live their lives and what world we as humanity want to create. So
Mm,
I totally agree that we do create that ripple effect. And I feel that as highly sensitive people, we just have a natural deep, the natural depth and a profound ability to affect change underneath the surface,
mm,
to really connect people with the emotional drivers, with their beliefs, with their blind spots, so that they can make authentic change rather than just, well, you're here, you want to get there, okay, let's make a plan, and
mm.
that's that.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Mm,
really powerful. Yeah, I love the words you use, authentic change. That really has an impact, because it's something that I love to work with in coaching as well, is
mm,
this theme of authenticity and helping people really tap into
mm,
like this feeling of, you know, what is my identity and what is my purpose. And you mentioned that theme of purpose, and being sensitive to wanting to do purposeful and meaningful work. And I see
mm,
that showing up a lot, and especially in COVID times, that that has kind of been challenged. And a lot of people that I'm speaking to are like, what kind of work should I be doing, and where should I put my energy and focus? So um,
mm,
to be able to help people through a coaching process in that way, I think is really valuable.
mm. And I love what you said about working with authenticity. As a highly sensitive person who is driven by doing meaningful work, how could I want to work with anyone else than someone who does such impactful work, like yourself, like supporting people to do authentic and purposeful and meaningful, like this
Mm,
is totally a ripple effect. If I can support someone like you, and you can then support you know 10 people, and those people support 10 people, I
mm.
agree, like it creates a yeah, wonderful ripple effect.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. And I wondered, are there any other tools or resources that you could kind of recommend or point people to on this journey of, whether it's highly sensitive people or highly sensitive coaches? Is there anything that you've come across or would recommend that kind of sticks in your mind?
Hmm. You know what, Josh? And I'd love to know, even though I know you're interviewing me, but I'd love to know what your go-to resources are,
Yeah.
because, um, I have been buying books about being a highly sensitive person, and I have found guidance in all of them, and especially Elaine Aron, and, I'm a huge supporter or of all the research and work that she has done. And I'm not naturally a researcher, so I love that there are people like her who do this research and understand the brain and the science behind it, so they can um, demonstrate what this trait is, and also to, to bring science in it rather than just, guesses or just a test. So from that perspective, I feel that starting with Elaine Aron, and she has some wonderful documentaries as well. So that would be some resources I'd recommend. But for me, I feel that once I've understood that information, I haven't found many HSP related books to be that helpful.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not sure why. I
Mm.
think it's partly, to a small extent, it's also because many HSP books are written by introverts, because 70% of HSPs are introverts. And I'm the 30%, I'm an extrovert.
Okay.
So a lot of the things are written from the perspective of an introverted person, and I don't entirely resonate with them.
Yeah.
But what I have found useful is to be in a community of highly sensitive people.
Mm.
I love the highly sensitive group, highly sensitive refuge group on Facebook.
Yeah.
They also have a blog, the highly sensitive refuge, and I love them. And I was able to contribute with a couple of articles for them as well.
Great. Yeah.
But other than that, I'm really fascinated by Jung and the work that he has done. And I love to explore themes of self-development,
Mhm.
meditation, inner work, um, psychotherapy, various approaches, and to layer that with what it means to be a highly sensitive person,
Mm.
So I
Yeah.
pick lots of things from different places and I layer them over what, how we interpret that as a highly sensitive person.
Mm.
Um, so, some books I might recommend, like my book for last year, top book, was a book called Meeting the Shadow
Mhm.
by Connie Zweig. I'm not sure how her name is pronounced,
Yeah.
um, which is all about shadow work and understanding our shadow side as individuals, like those unconscious things that still drive our behavior.
Mhm.
And actually, on that topic, I feel that as highly sensitive people, there are some shadow aspects that I tend to notice amongst highly sensitive people.
Mhm.
I don't know whether that's true for all of us, um, but I do notice things like perfectionism,
Mm.
um, people pleasing is a frequent one,
Mhm.
um, over responsibility, and this goes back to what we were saying about boundaries and
Yeah.
emotional, picking up energy and so on.
Mm.
Over responsibility is a really big one. We just tend to feel responsible for everything and everyone, and this is also why we are more prone to overwhelm and also to burnout.
Mm.
So these are some perhaps shadow aspects which are really interesting to explore for us as HSPs.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you. Yeah. There's so many great tips in there. I think it sounds like a really holistic and kind of integrated approach you've got to be able to read broadly, and to pull in these different aspects that are useful for the journey of understanding and growth. Um, yeah, also what resonated was this idea of being in a community. I love that as well. I found there's having a Facebook group of people that self-identify or are interested in this work around sensitivity has been really helpful
Mm.
for me as
Mhm.
well. I guess one other thing that comes to my mind, you asked what kind of resources that I would be interested in.
Mm.
I think something around body work, so bringing in some of the stuff
Mm.
you mentioned earlier, um, some kind of movement or bodily practice, I think can be really useful. And I would encourage, people to find what they enjoy doing, whether it's, stretching or yoga or running or dancing or some kind of movement that, helps you feel embodied and
Mm.
connect with your body as well. Because a
Mhm.
lot of the stuff we talked about has been in that that mental space around,
Mm.
overstimulation, deep thinking and processing and things. So to have a potentially a practice that you enjoy and that's bodily and movement could be a nice resource for people. um,
Mm.
I think coaching helps a lot. I think it gives you that time and space to explore what's going on for you as a sensitive person. um, I've had a few sessions of somatic coaching. I don't know if you've ever come across it or
Yeah.
tried it yourself, but
Mhm.
yeah, I found that really, really kind of beneficial and useful to go
Mm.
in from almost from the ground up, like what's going on in your body, and then try and make sense of the feelings and emotions. Um, that was helpful for me as a resource as well. But
Mm.
and you mentioned other approaches like psychotherapy and Jung's work and stuff. So I think there's so many resources. It's almost like
Mhm.
I would I would I would advise or recommend that people just spread the net broadly and then find what helps and what works for them. Um,
Mm.
especially
Oh, I just love you said. Sorry, go
no, go
on.
ahead. Yeah.
um, I really love that you said that because we are just so in tune with ourselves naturally. We
Mm,
are just so in tune with ourselves when we instinctively know what is good for us. And we also know what is not good for us.
yeah.
The fact that we don't trust that, that's
Yeah.
that's a different matter.
Yeah.
But I agree. See where your energy goes
Mm,
because and very often I'll have a question, like I'm someone I feel so unique in a way because I just hate exercise. I
mm,
hate exercise with a passion. There
yeah,
must be some trauma around exercise. I just don't like doing any kind of, especially cardio or things like that.
right.
Um, and I sort of like yoga, but just I think it hasn't been the right moment for me yet. So I think it's really important to find, like you said, to cast your net wide and see what where your energy is drawing you to. And as is, we are so naturally connected with the energy around us. So, for example, that can be the energy of the season,
Mm,
um, or even today it's a sunny day. You've been seeing the sun on my face.
yeah.
Um, that just automatically I feel it in myself, even though I don't necessarily get like really sad or low when it's not sunny, but I can
Yeah.
feel the influence. And
Mm,
many HSPs use, the sad lamps for seasonal affective
yeah.
disorder,
Yeah.
um, because we experience that in darker days. So we're so connected with nature, and having something that involves nature can be really useful when it comes to embodying. And actually, you reminded me of a client I had who was very logical, and um, it was really difficult to connect with anything else outside of that.
Mm,
So I think I asked the question like, well, what do you feel in your body when you say that? And they just, I don't know, I'm not sure, don't. Um, And we only had a few sessions, but this person contacted me months later and said, that session that we had was so helpful because I never asked myself how I feel in my body or what I'm experiencing. And
mm,
since then, I've implemented this routine where I'm doing regular check ins with myself.
mhm.
And it's amazing. I noticed that I hold so much tension in my shoulders. And I just, and that's the reason why, I've been having pain and so on. So
Yeah.
just doing these body check-ins helps me um, you know, to adjust if I need to,
Mm,
and also gives me additional information about the things I'm thinking about. So
I love
yeah,
that.
just on the
Yeah.
topic of body work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. It's really powerful. And it kind of comes back to what you were saying at the beginning of the conversation about awareness and helping people to build that awareness. And it sounds like your client was really benefiting from that, just even that question of what's going on in your body. So That's really, really cool.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think it's really important also to meet our clients where they are.
Mm,
Um, you know, because there isn't one size fits all solution.
yeah.
Some people, for example, haven't done a lot of inner work, or they haven't been to therapy or coaching before. Um, yeah, but I feel it's just really important, because if someone is very highly logical and they've never, they're not really that connected with their emotions, um, it can become frustrating to try and do that work from day one. So it's important to meet them exactly in the space where they are and take that first small step.
Mm.
And then you can take the next one and then the next one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah. So meet them where they're at. Such a good reminder. Yeah. Um, cool. So before we kind of wrap up for today, I wondered, is there anything else we haven't covered, or anything else you feel that would be useful to share, or do you feel like we've kind of covered what you wanted to in this discussion?
Hmm. Um, hmm. I could probably talk about this for like 2.5 days at least,
Yeah.
nonstop. Um, I guess one thing that comes to mind is trauma, which obviously is not necessarily something that we work with in coaching,
Hmm.
because that's about therapy, right?
Mm.
Um, Coaching does have a therapeutic element to it. There was an author, I don't remember who it was. I think it was, yeah, I don't remember who it was, but um, it was talking about therapy with a capital T and coaching being therapeutic with a small t.
Right.
And I think that's just a really good description, of like the difference between coaching and therapy. And there is, a very clear distinction between the two. Um, but in my experience, very often HSPs tend to have experienced some trauma in the past.
Mm.
Um, and sometimes we can be disconnected from this idea of trauma because, perhaps we haven't experienced a specific situation that was highly traumatic, but there might have been lots of small things that added up
Mm.
to an experience of trauma. And
Hmm.
because we are so sensitive and we're so in tune with our environment, with the social aspect, with the emotional aspect, it's very easy for us to internalize those things and experience them as trauma.
Mm.
So in my experience, many HSPs have gone through some experience that was traumatic in their developmental years.
Yeah.
And I feel, again, I don't want to generalize because each person's experience is completely unique. So I don't want to, dismiss um, um, individual experiences. But yeah, that has been my experience that HSPs tend to have had something like that.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's what you mentioned about internalizing small things over time. I think it really makes a lot of sense. And yeah, in my understanding and experience, I think coaching can be an amazing gateway into exploring, past experiences, and dipping into what is useful for the here and now, and for going forward as well. So yeah, and I'm still learning and experiencing the boundaries of, what is therapy and what is coaching.
Mm.
In my own coaching journey, it's something that I'm trying to learn more about, and understand. So I think this topic of, you know trauma amongst clients and amongst sensitive people is so important. um,
Yeah, and I feel that over time, um, our level of comfort may increase, which is not to say that we more and more become therapists, because there is still a very clear boundary.
yeah.
But you can become comfortable with a client bringing up things like that, and being able to bring the conversation back into the coaching space, focusing on, you know, when clients do mention those things, which can be often when it's a highly sensitive, not very often, but invariably when you're working over a longer period, that can come up.
Yeah.
Bringing it back into the present, and you know, looking at how that looks like in the future, and
Mm,
also building that internal awareness for us as coaches, so we know what to recommend, or what support those people can get outside of the coaching space. And
mhm.
I personally have found therapy to be, you know, extremely useful.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Okay, thank you for bringing that. It's really important. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, so the last question is, where can people connect with you? Where can they find you? Where can they work with you?
Yeah. I think the best space is Facebook. I love to have conversations with people who are highly sensitive people.
Mhm.
Um, my website is more focused on my coaching work at the moment,
Mm.
and it's beatricezornek.com, so my name.com.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm also starting to use Clubhouse. I find it to be a really nice space for highly sensitive people. So, you know, if you use Clubhouse and you'd like to follow me, I sometimes create rooms for highly sensitive coaches, and I also join or create my own rooms on just being a highly sensitive person.
Mm.
And they're usually smaller spaces, but they're just so, you know, nourishing and insightful. So it's quite nice to have that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Amazing. What I'll do is I'll put a link as well to your website when we upload this podcast, so people can connect and find you. Um,
Yeah, thank you so much.
Brilliant. Beatrice, thank you so much for today's conversation. Really enjoyed the exploration with you, and I feel like we covered so much in a short space of
Mm.
time.
Yeah, I've really loved your questions as well, and yeah, you have a really lovely presence that just made it really easy and comfortable for me to share what was coming up. So thank you as well.
Thank you. Great. All right. So yeah, until next time, thanks again.